A clear vision for racial and economic justice keeps us navigating towards our North Star, an America where we can all thrive.
What does it look like to challenge the systems and renegotiate our social contract with terms that actually serve and protect Black and Brown people?
Community change calls for a radical approach to create a more racially equitable and unified society,
centered on healing justice to achieve abundance for our interconnected and beloved families.
Graced with a liberatory approach, community change brings together our 5 decades of organizational practice paired with the wisdom of lived experience to boldly reimagine what is possible.
Our vision starts with people, Black, Brown, and Indigenous people,
immigrants, and women of color.
We will address the physical, mental, and emotional burdens our partners have been previously expected to shoulder.
And we will help these movement leaders to boldly transform how they tell their own stories, to challenge dominant ideologies and repair harm across racial lines.
These partner leaders will shape policies, narratives, and culture.
Our role is to learn and to teach,
to share new technologies, and to build on the transformational organizing we know works.
Join us on this road towards racial justice.
And we will realize freedom and liberation for all.
Welcome. I was muted. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Good evening, and thank you for joining us. I am Brittany Gray, Senior Organizer at Community Change Action. Founded in 1980, Community Change has continuously built the power of people most marginalized by injustice, especially people of color, women, immigrants, people struggling to make ends meet, to envision and fight for a society where all communities thrive. Are few principles that align with both our mission and values. We believe that we must have freedom to thrive, radical inclusion, equity-driven policy, innovative government, and true democracy. This evening, we are sharing space to uplift reparations and democracy in celebration of Juneteenth. Juneteenth, short for June 19th, marks the federal troops arrived in Galveston, Texas in 1865 to take control of the state and ensure that all enslaved people were freed. The troops' arrival came a full 2.5 years after the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation. Juneteenth honors the end to slavery in the United States and is considered the longest running African American holiday. Hopefully, soon to be the first African American federal holiday. We may find out today. But what does this mean for Black people in America as we continue to fight for voting rights, reparations, which is owed to us, human rights, and ultimately our existence in this country? That a country that shows little to no regard for our labor, our time, our talent, our brilliance, our intellect, and our sacrifice since our forced entry into this country. So we'll talk about that this evening. We'll spend a little time talking about that. Before I introduce the panelists, I want to invite you to post your name and location into the chat. While our guests all represent the best of Texas, this moment is critical to all of us. We also ask that you drop your questions for our panelists and Representative Lee in the chat throughout the event. We will be joined this evening by panelists, Representative Sheila Jackson Lee of District 18. She's currently on the floor now casting a vote, so she may be just a little late. And our moderator, Sasha Leggett, Director of Pure Justice, along with Devin Branch, the Political Director of Texas Organizing Project. Both are members of Community Change's Black Freedom Collective. The Black Freedom Collective is a growing network of Black-led organizations that build power and capacity in an effort to change the material conditions of Black folks. I'll now hand it over to Sasha to bring us into this historical moment in current fight.
Hi, good evening, everyone. And thank you so much, Brittany, for that introduction. So we celebrate Juneteenth as the official emancipation of slaves in Texas. However, when you started talking, there's something that a critical piece of what you said that really sticks out. It says that the emancipation and the release of those slaves happened a full 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation was signed. And that, to me, speaks to the consistent and persistent nature in this country to oppress Black people and other communities of color, to obtain labor and economic resources generated by Black people for the advancement and wealth building of other families that are not our own, and the consistent denial of full acceptance and citizenship and liberation of Black people here in the United States. These things in this moment at this time stick out to me so much because unfortunately they are issues that continue to infringe upon the freedom and the liberation of Black people and communities of color right now. We're in a moment where we're coming out of a pandemic, kind of, but we're also still reflecting on two major events that took place in 2020 that had significant impacts on communities of color, and some of which we probably haven't seen since 2008. And those events were the COVID-19 pandemic and the 2020 elections. In 2020, communities of color were hit the hardest by COVID-19, leading to one of the most horrific economic crises of our lifetime. Prior to that pandemic, approximately 40% of Houstonians and folks around America were unable to respond to a $400 emergency if one were to happen. Given that fact, the economic downfall or impact of the pandemic just exacerbated some of those issues in those families. We saw hikes in Black unemployment, upwards of 16%. We saw large portions of African American owned businesses completely obliterated, and some of them may never recover. And all of these things speak to some of the historic policies that Black people suffer when it comes down to economic oppression, and the inability to gain wealth because it's been very systemic and systematic in keeping them out of certain things. But because of what is happening around the pandemic, and because of the response at the federal level, we've been able to have some very robust conversations about reparations, and how do we actually cure historic disinvestment in communities of color, specifically Black communities. And that's been amazing. There have been some local jurisdictions that are actually putting in place plans for reparations response for Black communities. None of those are Texas yet. I'm hopeful, but not yet. One of the things that does give us an opportunity to think about this is the fact that the federal government gave local governments, including Harris County and the city of Houston, money in response to COVID-19 from the American Rescue Plan Act. Harris County is going to receive $914 million, which allows us to start to think about how can we use this as an opportunity to, move forward in terms of racial justice, think about this historic disinvestment and in this moment, and think about how do we actually advance communities of color, specifically Black communities. The other thing that I said happened in 2020 that had a major impact on our communities was the 2020 election. For me, the 2020 elections were extraordinarily, at first they were kind of scary because, we were trying to figure out how do you vote in the midst of a pandemic? Do you put yourself at risk? But it was amazing because places like Texas were able to come up with innovative ideas, Harris County specifically, ways to expand the ballot box to our communities. And as a result, we saw record numbers in voter registration and voter turnout. I'd like to give shout outs to organizations like Pure Justice and Texas Organizing Project who took a lot of time and energy to make sure that we participated in ensuring that registration and that voter turnout. But as most of you listening, you all know that there were a lot of unhappy people about the results of the 2020 elections. And unfortunately, as a result, we have seen a widespread effort from folks who are putting a priority on voter suppression at this moment. And as we think about Juneteenth, and as we think about the liberation and freedom of others, how do we start to think through stopping these things? The response has been astonishing. Over 14 states have enacted 22 laws that would increase voter restrictions on voter access. And Texas wanted to join the ranks of those states with their own series of voter suppression bills masked as voter integrity bills. Texans, are a big or go home kind of people. And so I want to allow colleagues from others, from my other grassroots organization to start to talk about, what did this look like in Texas and how Texans have responded to this effort to suppress their votes.
All right, and so now we'll bring on the political director of Texas Organizing Project, Devin Branch.
Thank you. I think it is very important what Sasha was mentioning about these efforts that are happening in Texas to suppress the vote. But first, it's important to put it in context. Texas is already the state that is the most difficult state to vote in the United States. So Texas is really now the epicenter of the fight for democracy. So what we had in the state of Texas, right, is during this previous legislative session, similar to what we saw in Georgia and many states across the country, efforts by generally speaking Republican legislatures to push forward reactionary voter suppression bills, both in some cases as large packages, more like omnibus bills, and sometimes through a series of smaller bills, all aimed at suppressing the ability of Black and Latino voters, in particular in the state of Texas, to vote. And so two of these bills that we fought against during this legislative session were House Bill 6 and Senate Bill 7. And together they would have criminalized efforts to do basic things like making voting by mail more accessible to people. So if you were to hand someone or to encourage someone to get a vote by mail ballot, even during the pandemic, which we're still in, though we're towards the tail end of it, right? That would have been a state jail felony. So they would have criminalized giving people access to vote by mail. They wanted to also directly retaliate against some of the measures that were taken in Harris County in particular to make voting safer during the pandemic and more accessible to people through things like 24-hour voting and drive-through voting. And over 137,000 Texans in Harris County participated in those methods of voting. That is huge. And as a consequence of that and other efforts, we had a record voter turnout both in Harris County and in the state of Texas. And so even though in Texas we did not, the presidential election still swung in the favor of Donald Trump. In counties throughout the state of Texas, progressives began to take hold. And in places like Harris County and Fort Bend County, counties that had historically been controlled and dominated completely by white political leaders that had not the interest of Black and Latino voters at heart, were completely flipped. And so even though the state didn't flip as a whole in 2020, what was seen was the writing on the wall, that there was an increase, a significant increase in the power of the Black and the Latino electorate. And those who are currently in power and who really have held power in the state of Texas since the collapse of Reconstruction were fearful of what that meant for them. And so they're seeking to retain their hold on power by disempowering Black and Latino voters. And so coalitions of organizations, a massive coalition of grassroots organizations came together to fight against this. Pure Justice and TOP were involved in that. But there were over 40 organizations across the state who came together and decided to attack this bill on several fronts. Some were doing, making use of both the inside and the outside strategy. So we had people who were reaching out more quietly to representatives and other businesses to get them to speak out and to put on pressure behind the scenes. Then you had organizations like TOP, Pure Justice, and others like MOVE and the Texas Civil Rights Project also being involved in demonstrations across the state, targeting both corporate entities as well as the political figures who were pushing these bills. We had hundreds and thousands of people participating and making phone calls to these offices. And we had hundreds of people going directly to the state legislature itself to give testimony before the state legislature in opposition to these bills. In fact, we had so many people going to the state legislature to oppose HB 6 that they shut down the hearing. I was one of the people who drove to Austin to participate in that debate and to testify. And we were not able to testify as a consequence of them adjourning initially for lunch and just refusing to reconvene. So there was a huge effort to oppose it there. And there was targeting not just at the House, but labor has gotten involved in this fight as well and will continue. So in Harris County, for instance, and in Texas, one of the biggest contributors to the supporters of voter suppression has been AT&T. And we decided to embark in a corporate campaign largely based on our looking at what was going on in Georgia. Georgia also famously had to fight a voter suppression bill. Unfortunately, it passed, and the corporate escalation campaign fell into full swing after it passed. We had the benefit of learning from their experience, and we engaged in also targeting corporations and collectives of corporations like the Greater Houston Partnership. And as a consequence, we had over 175 businesses that were part of the Greater Houston Partnership come out publicly against that bill. American Airlines came out publicly against the bill. Microsoft came out publicly against the bill. AT&T has still refused, in spite of the fact that AT&T employees represented by the Communication Workers of America have come out and demanded that they support efforts to put an end to voter suppression. AT&T has still not done the right thing, but we're hoping that as we continue to push, that we'll convince those companies like AT&T and others who have yet to take a strong position to stand with us on the right side of history. So that's some of the fight back that's been occurring. And as a consequence of some of this fight back, we were successful in stopping the passage of SB 7 during this legislative session. And we have, many of us, relationships we've developed over a period of years with people who are in the House. And we had a very significant action that I think is very rare in the history of American politics that occurred in the state of Texas. And that is the Democratic representatives, led by those representatives of color, Black and Latino representatives in reality, right? Walked out of the House rather than vote on the voter suppression bill and killed that bill at the end of the legislative session. And that happened on May 30th. So in Texas, you require 100 representatives on the floor to have a vote. There are 67 Democratic reps in Texas. So they have the capacity, if they leave, to shut down the process. And that's something that happened. And every Black representative was part of that walkout with one exception, who happens to be in Harris County, Representative Harold Dutton. And since he didn't walk out, we walked on him just the other day on Sunday. We did a demonstration and a press conference against him at his own office, because this is not a partisan issue. This is an issue about democracy. And if you stand for it, we will stand with you. And if you stand against it, we will stand against you, no matter what party you claim to belong to.
Thank you, Devin. And it's so encouraging to hear about the fight in Texas, and especially to hear about standing up for justice, whether you're on the right side or the wrong side, for sure. So great work that you all are doing, and other grassroots organizations like Pure Justice and Texas Organizing Project. But what I really would like for you to share with our audience is, why should people continue to press forward despite the barriers that are in place to hinder our path towards liberation? Why should people continue to press forward?
Well, one, because we have, was this to me or just?
Both.
You want me to go
Sasha,
first?
you
Or you want to go first?
Go ahead first, and then I can also speak.
Okay, well, so what I'll say is, as we're right now we're talking about Juneteenth, and we're talking about folks who were denied freedom and liberation for hundreds of years. And, they continue to be optimistic and continue to, think about ways to press forward for their own liberation, and think about things that they could do, even if it wasn't something that they themselves would benefit from in their lifetime. And given that we cannot afford to not do the same, our democracy means everything. And we cannot afford to be discouraged. And I know that it's discouraging. And I know it's easy to feel like, well, they're going to do whatever they want to do, or no, my vote just doesn't matter. But when you take in the context of the systems, that have oppressed our people, but then think about the resilience of our people and the advancements they have been able to make despite, or in spite of, we have that same opportunity. We have that same capability. We have the same, energy, or we should, because one, we owe it to our ancestors to do so, and we owe it to ourselves to do so, and we owe it to the world who looks to America as the beacon of hope of democracy, to show them that we will not allow our democracy to be compromised for people who just want to continue, to take away our rights. This is our right to be able to have a democracy. And so I want to encourage people to join the fight and to do their part.
Right, and to piggyback on what Sasha said, this is a 400-year-old struggle that we are involved in as descendants of enslaved African people. And we have, for the first time in our history, right now, this generation, the opportunity to put an end of 400 years of naked racial oppression of our people. We have for the first time in our history, we have that capacity to put a permanent end to this. And as Texas goes, so goes the South, and so goes the nation effectively, or the country. I don't want to say the nation, as so goes the United States of America, right? And right now in Texas, for instance, Donald Trump won Texas by 600,000 votes, roughly. There were over 1 million registered Black voters who did not vote in the state of Texas in the 2020 election. So within our hands alone, theoretically speaking, we have that capacity to change the destiny of the state of Texas, and by doing so, the entire trajectory of the politics of the South and the nation. Texas is really like the linchpin of the entire neo-Confederate power in the South. It's the largest population state. It has the most electoral votes. It has the largest economy, and it has, the most suppressive voting rights. So as we win this fight here, we pave the way for the complete collapse of the entire neo-Confederate power structure that was erected, in the wake of Juneteenth, after the collapse of Reconstruction. So this is really a fight to continue the work of reconstruction. And we can win. We're this close, right? All we have to do is continue pushing forward to go that extra inch. And we really can't stop and should not stop until we have complete freedom from those who have oppressed our people for 4 centuries. It would be a shame if we did, right?
Right. Thank you, Devin. We will win. Being from Mississippi, I cannot help but to echo those same sentiments. We will win. The South will win. It's very important that we do. So many are counting on. The Congresswoman, Sheila Jackson Lee, has been delayed just a little due to the vote on the floor. So we're going to move on to another question, and this is for the both of you. How do folks in Texas feel with regard to Juneteenth possibly becoming a federal? What are you hearing on the ground? No particular order, just whoever wants to answer.
So what I'm hearing, well, I'll say what I've seen on social media and what I've heard. I've seen people say, well, it's about time because we've been doing this. You know, we've been recognizing Juneteenth as a holiday and celebrating it with our families and our friends. And so, you know, they feel like, well, it's good that it will become a federal holiday that, you know, others are you know, recognizing and can participate in. But Texans have been doing this for quite some time. And so it's kind of like, yeah, well, you know, thank you for joining, you know, getting on board with this. But I do think it's a great opportunity for others across the country who have no idea what Juneteenth is. And I have been amazed that there are so many that don't know about this holiday, don't know about its significance, and have never participated in a celebration of Juneteenth. And so I'm excited for it to get the national attention so that people can understand its historical importance.
Absolutely. And I think another very important thing is that as people understand the historical importance of Juneteenth, then the conversation about the history of enslavement of our people and the long-term consequences of that are more readily had. So I think this will also facilitate that conversation that will lead into the conversation about reparations and why reparations are important and essential, you know. And so I think it is beneficial. I think people are seeing it in that light. I just think that, you know, people also shouldn't be overly optimistic about this ushering. So this was a bipartisan effort to get Juneteenth put on the floor for a vote, right? But I don't think that people should be overly optimistic that that level of bipartisanship is going to continue when it comes to things that actually threaten the balance of power, like voting rights. You know, so it is a good thing, you know, and it's a good thing to spark that conversation, and people should celebrate it. It will educate people, and it will have practical benefits for people, especially federal employees and others who, if it's a federal holiday, won't have to work that day. You know, so that's a very practical deliverable that comes out of this.
Devin has mentioned reparations, which is definitely a topic for tonight. And so I just want to ask a question. How do you put a cash value on hundreds of years of servitude?
Ooh. I really don't know that you can, but it doesn't mean it shouldn't happen. And that's people want to use it as an excuse to say, well, this happened so long ago, and how do you quantify? You know, I'm not an economist. I don't know how you quantify, but I believe people damn well need to figure it out because it needs to happen. We deserve it. Our families have been suffering and have not been able to, you know, benefit from the generational wealth that they have created in this country. You know, when you look at certain families and the values that they have and the access to housing and things that we don't have, that actually leads to liberation. Economics is a key component of liberation, and our communities and Black people have been left out on purpose, despite the fact that their labor is a direct contributor to the wealth of this nation. And so whosever job it is to quantify it, figure it out, they need to do so. But what they cannot do is make the excuse that it's been too long, nobody knows. The other excuse is nobody's living as a slave. None of that matters. If your family is still generating wealth from slave labor, which it is, we deserve to reap those benefits as well.
Absolutely. And you can quantify some aspects of the harm, not just the harm, but some of the gain that was done. So labor has value, and things were produced, and there are records that show, resources that were gotten by banks and others. And the entire economic life of the South and the entire Industrial Revolution really has its origins in the enslavement of our people. It is my and your grandmother and great-grandmother and grandfather that made cotton king, and that spurred the creation of the cotton gin and the Industrial Revolution and other things of that nature. So there are things that you can find to quantify, dollar values, but there are other things that go beyond dollars, including things like land, and how many people were dispossessed of land. So, my family is rooted deeply in the South, both in Mississippi and South Carolina, and our Gullah people from South Carolina, and were driven off the land, and places like Hilton Head Island, if we look at Sherman's Field Order 15, that's where this 40 acres in the mule concept comes out of a lot. Those were islands, Hilton Head Island and several other islands in the Carolina Sea and Georgia Sea Islands were set aside for exclusive Black settlement. And many of those islands have been almost completely depopulated of their Black population, especially places like Hilton Head that was supposed to be reserved for Black people. Now the average Black person can't afford to, have a shack on Hilton Head. The average house is over $1 million on Hilton Head Island. So there are some very real things that we can address, not just in terms of dollars, but in terms of things like land. And truthfully, land is the basis of all freedom. If you don't control places on this earth where you can prevent yourself from being suppressed, then you really have nothing at the end of the day. And we see that as our people are being pushed around through gentrification and other things, constantly on the move, unable to settle and to develop community as a consequence of the fact that they don't control the land on which they live. So we can also address that question as well when we start talking about reparations, and not just dollars and cents.
Agreed, Devin. Freeing the land is very important, and definitely freeing the land by any means necessary throughout the South and throughout this country. As we think about how economically Black folks are throughout our country and in your home state of Texas, are there any specific toward the American Rescue Plan, local resources, child care tax credit, income tax credit? How does that impact your membership in your particular organizations? Are there any specific things that you're doing around those issues?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, the Harris County is getting $914 million. Some of those dollars are going to be direct cash assistance. A lot of the members from Pure Justice, also from TOP, are low to moderate income members. And so these are members who are, we're trying to make sure that they have access to economic opportunities. So these kinds of resources are extraordinarily important to them. So, what we're doing is making sure that they know about them, making sure that the resources actually get to them. When you start looking deep into disaster recovery and various different programs that are supposed to help people in need, somehow they don't ever get to the people in need. And so ensuring that the programs that are being created are done so in a way that infuse equity, infuse targeting, infuse fairness. So it is getting to those folks who have a real economic need for them. And I think from that, one of the interesting things were the stimulus checks that people have gotten, right? And previously it's been, no, we don't want to give, we can't give certain kind of people direct cash assistance. We can't do that because they're going to go out and spend it in all these different kind of ways. That's the excuse until the pandemic hit everybody. And the first thing they want to do is give everybody direct cash assistance, which I'm supportive of. But now you can't use that excuse to say this is an inappropriate way to spend resources and funds, because what we know is that folks who are of low income or moderate income, they're the best money managers in our country. They don't have a choice otherwise. And so we can give them these kinds of assistances. And I know that these programs are coming about. And my hope is that they lead to something more sustainable, like universal basic income or guaranteed income, because of what we've seen in the programs across the country that have done this, they actually have been successful in lifting those individuals, taking advantage of them out of poverty. And I think it's a great opportunity for us to see that happen here in Texas.
I think Sasha really addressed the question quite well, and I think one of the things that TOP and Pure Justice do is make sure that the voices of Black and Latino working class people are not just heard, but are impactful in the decisions that are made around the use of resources, especially at the county level in Harris County. And that's possible because organizations like TOP, we say we fight with two fists, like a people power fist and a political power fist. So we, our members engage in a process of endorsing candidates. And, the county judge of Harris County, Lena Hidalgo, was endorsed by our membership. And she became county judge by approximately 2% of the vote. She defeated a very powerful long-term incumbent. The Commissioner Adrian Garcia, the same thing. Commissioner Rodney Ellis, who had been the lone Democrat, representing an overwhelmingly Black district, is also someone that we've worked closely with as an organization over a period of years. And so our members, even though we have a good relationship, we still have our demands and we still hold people accountable. And our members show up at Commissioner's Court and make their demands. Our members also meet with the commissioners and the county judge and discuss these things. And it's not something actually in Harris County, we have the benefit of having a county judge and people like Commissioner Ellis, who we don't have to force to listen to us, right? Like there's a positive relationship there where we can sit down and have this conversation. Black and Latino directly impacted working class people are at the table in Harris County as a consequence of the work that organizations like TOP and Pure Justice have done in the county. And so we will be having an influence on how some of those resources are spent. Unfortunately, we don't have the same kind of influence at the state level. And there are so many billions of dollars that are effectively misappropriated as a consequence of our lack of state power in places like Texas. And that's why they want to suppress our vote, because they know that once we shift that political power, we will change the economic dynamic as well, and where investment happens in the state of Texas, and we'll do so in a way that's more equitable.
Thank you. And I'm sure folks saw the update that the House has passed the bill and declaring that Juneteenth will be a federal holiday. So we are very excited about that. We're making history right now, and this is a very powerful moment. Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee's staff is preparing her to come on screen shortly. One last question, and this will be for Sasha, is how do folks continue to put pressure on local government, especially in Harris County? What are some ways that folks can continue to put pressure?
So, as the things that we've been talking about, protecting our democracy and receiving access to, economic opportunities, these are nonpartisan issues. These are issues that are impacting a wide range of individuals. And so, finding out all the people who should be involved, multiple people need to be involved. 2, figuring out who your representatives are and finding out what they are doing or aren't doing around these issues. Make your demands known. Following the money. Who is supporting these campaigns? Who is supporting these voter suppression campaigns? Who are the, lobbyist corporations or whomever saying don't give, certain groups, direct cash assistance, or folks who don't want to, increase minimum wage, because this is why we need these infusion of dollars and people can't survive off of one job. Like, what companies are doing these things, and making sure that you connect to grassroots organizations who are doing things about it, like TOP, like Pure Justice, so that we can collectively come together, do demonstrations, do sit-ins, walkouts, calls, all of these things that we do collectively, apply pressure, and it gets results.
Absolutely, and we have to hold the line during the special session, right? Like, so people don't let their feet off the gas. That's the idea. We have to escalate the fight, not step back. In fact, on Sunday, there's going to be a demonstration at the state capitol in Texas, where we're calling on thousands of people to come out to the state capitol and demand that these efforts to suppress our vote be defeated. So we need to keep the pressure up. We need to also keep the pressure up on our allies as well in the House, to let them know that we will have their back if they continue to take strong stands in defense of our right to vote.
Great. So we definitely want to thank Devin and Sasha, who are members of our Black Freedom Collective, building power and capacity throughout this country. It's a growing network of Black-led organizations. And we want to really think about how are our organizers on the ground. There was a question in the from Tamika, and she says that she still hasn't received her stimulus check payment. So we want to know, how are organizers helping folks sign up for the CTC and earned income tax credit in your areas?
So, some of the things that Pure Justice have done, we talk to members, our members of us, those who qualify, and help walk them through the process, and share the government link that where you can get it, childtaxcredit.gov, and help them. We've also put things out on our social media and put things out in our newsletter about how you can apply. But the other thing, I think what most folks need to understand about why things are moving so slow is that the previous administration, kind of defunded some of these organizations, like some of the administrative agencies that are responsible for doing this work. And so they are delayed, significantly delayed. Some of what they've had to do is do things manually due to COVID. They don't have as many workers as they had previously. And I know that President Biden released a statement about trying to rectify some of those issues by hiring more people and making sure that that they are getting to these issues. So the delays are unfortunate, but we are trying to help individuals as best that we can.
All right. So we want to welcome Representative Sheila Jackson Lee to the panel today. We are very excited to have her on, joining us today. Devin will be introducing Representative Lee, so I'll hand it off to Devin.
Thank you, Brittany. And so we are glad that she was able to join us in spite of the fact that she had to do her duty, on the floor in a way that actually could be very beneficial to us, right? She's always working. And so Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, I'll just give a little bit of a background while we're waiting for her to join us, is a very influential and powerful voice in Washington. And so she's currently serving her 11th term as a member of the House of Representatives. And she's representing the 18th Congressional District, which is centered in Houston, in Harris County, where we're located. And she's been a very strong, especially during this voting rights fight. She was a very strong and outspoken defender of voting rights in Texas, and a very strong opponent of House Bill 6 and SB 7, which were voter suppression bills. And she appeared on several platforms with organizations like Top and Pure Justice, and press conferences with us condemning these bills publicly. Even though these were Texas State House as opposed to federal House bills, she was taking a stand in support of the needs of her constituents on these issues. And that was a very welcomed addition to the struggle. And she's also played a role in using her influence to help push the fight to get corporations and others to speak out in opposition to those bills. So she's been an ally in the voting rights fight in Texas for the entire time that she's been in the House. So this is a very important issue. And she's also currently one of the co-sponsors of HR 1, which is the For the People Act, and a co-sponsor also of HR 40. And so she's still wrapping up, so now that she's done wrapping up and, the work that she's done on the floor just now for us, we're going to then bring her into the conversation. And so we would like to welcome Representative Sheila Jackson Lee, the 11th time representative of the 18th District. Welcome, Representative Jackson Lee. How are you?
Devin, it is a pleasure to be with all of you, Brittany, Sasha, and the entire team. I greet you from the Rayburn Room, just off the floor of the House. This is called the Rayburn Room, Sam Rayburn, a Texan, but what a difference a day makes. I fight because I believe, and I fight because we should, and because we must. And so when I make this first statement, let it be very clear that I understand that our journey continues, and voting is the very infrastructure of liberty and freedom. But I'm very excited to say to you that in this landscape of holidays, in the landscape of recognizing who we are, we have one holiday that one would say deals with the history of the descendants of enslaved Africans, which took more than 20 years to be enacted as a federal holiday, and that is the birthday of Dr. Martin Luther King. So I'm very proud to say that I just came off the floor as a Speaker Pro Tem. My voice is a little weak because we now have that holiday, Juneteenth, of which so many young people want to sort of move away, but it is the sense of our basic reason for being. The reason we got here was in the bottom of the belly of slave boats. And so the House just voted 415, nobody expected that, to 14 noes, 415 yeas to establish Juneteenth as a national Independence Day. Juneteenth, with all the folks that sweat and tears now have a place in addition to make it what we want it to be, to speak of freedom and the journey of freedom, and that the journey may be still on the road, but we have not yet finished. So I'm excited about that. Forgive me for starting with that because it opens the door. When I went to Tulsa, I said that June was going to be the month of recognizing the pain of African Americans and the joy of African Americans. The experience of spending 4 days in Tulsa, knowing that 300 of our brothers and sisters, just a few years after the Emancipation Proclamation and Juneteenth, were thrown into a grave unmarked, 300, that survivors had to escape past burning Black bodies in the streets of Greenwood. and that we needed to be able to not step away from our fight, but to step into the fight. HR 1 and HR 4 are a combination of that fight. The voting rights is crucial because it is, as I said, the roadmap for the empowerment of all of the other issues. Quickly, the Texas delegation of Democrats were here over the last 2 days. They have met with any number of senators. They've met with Speaker Pelosi and all of us in the Texas Democratic delegation. They've met with the Vice President, Vice President Harris. They've met with Senator Schumer, as well as Senator Manchin and all in between. And they have met proudly with the Congressional Black Caucus, which was a very resourceful meeting of a continued commitment to not cease until we pass a repair, if you will, of the broken election system created by 43 states doing legislation to cover the big lie that does not exist. But in our speeches on the floor, we have yet to pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. Remember what I said, this is a month. So we engage and encourage you to get engaged, that we finish this journey. The voting rights legislation and HR 4, soon to be S4 as it is S1. Let me be very clear that S1 or S4 and HR 4 are coming. They actually have to follow the Supreme Court, which is about to render its decision whether or not Section 2 has to be repaired, if you can believe it. We're already in the mix on Section 5 that they've destroyed that, the pre-clearance. But they may be making a decision about Section 2. If we do HR 4, all of that has to be included. And we can't include it until we get the decision from the Supreme Court, which is coming this month. But
okay, in Congresswoman, just because some of our viewers may not be so familiar with the For the People Act, HR 1, which you co-sponsored, and then also HR 4, could you just give a brief overview of what HR 1, the For the People Act, is supposed to do to address voting rights in the country?
Absolutely. HR 1 would make Election Day a federal holiday. That's why we should know that holidays are important. Giving people a day off to vote, not having people scramble around to vote. It would provide for automatic registration of eligible voters. Some states have it. It is crucial to be able to have automatic registration. It requires states to provide for same-day registration and voting. That means you show up on the primary day and you register and you vote. There are a lot of people who work. They don't even know where to find the voter registrar. And in addition, there are a lot of people who move and you punish them for their economic condition that causes them to move, but they deserve the right to vote so they can improve their economic condition. Excuse my voice. Require states to provide for same-day registration, require universal, no excuse, mail-in voting, and prohibiting states from requiring voters casting a ballot by mail to provide identification. Can you imagine? There are some people who don't have identification, and if you are shut in, your identification may be long dated because you are disabled. It requires states.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Requires states to allow voters to return mail-in ballots, guarantees absentee voting rights, re-enfranchises those who have been disenfranchised by the criminal justice system, guarantees federal voting rights for citizens, and one of the things that's very important, provides for every provisional ballot to be counted. People come up, they have something shady going on in terms of, when I say shady, being rejected for just a variety of reasons that they don't understand. They vote a provisional ballot, and we don't know if it ever gets counted. So HR 1 is the mechanics of ensuring that you have the tools to vote. It also includes weeks of early voting.
Well, that's a very important bill, especially given what we're facing here in Texas, where they're trying to criminalize vote by mail. And so just one question on that bill, and maybe you can add in a question, answer another question around the HR 40 as well. And that is, what are the obstacles right now to moving HR 1 and HR 40 in the House?
HR 1 is a voting bill, and right now, HR 1 has passed the United States House of Representatives resoundingly. It is in the Senate, and the Senate opposed. It's a huge bill. It doesn't just have the voting aspects of it. It has issues dealing with ethics and campaign finance reform, which are absolutely imperative. But it is my belief that we must get the voting aspect passed before we get into the election season. Otherwise, we will have another nasty SB7 coming in the special session. And we will have cameras intimidating elderly persons and disabled persons and others in the voting booth or the poll while honest poll workers or election workers are trying to help me, a disabled person, vote, and you have a camera suggesting that I'm being told how to vote. I know about poll watchers because in every aspect of my district, they are there because for some reason they see the color of our skin and they know that we are not voting correctly. And that is not true. We vote fairly and correctly as Black folk. We just want to be able to not have to count the beans in a jar to be able to vote without restriction. Leading into that, so that is the issue. It is a lot of senators are objecting to what else is in it. But you know what? Come what may, we need to pass HR 1 in the election aspect of HR 1 and get it along with HR 4. That will be Senate 4, Senate 1. We need you to weigh in. We need you to go across America to be able to speak to the senators and say this is life or death. We need this passed. HR 40, we're excited, has passed out of the Judiciary Committee, and we're now in negotiations. Today, this vote, that is a vote on Black people, by saying we too are America. It's a vote for America. We say HR 40 is a vote for America. We voted it out of the judiciary. Never has it been done, vote out of a committee. Now it's ready to go to the floor. We need you to be able to say that the Commission to Study Slavery and develop reparation proposals is as much a part of equality, justice, freedom for African Americans, where there has never been a moment where we put up a stop sign and say, you know what did slavery do? What are the disparate impacts, indicia, sociologically, psychologically, economically, politically, health-wise? What is all of this as relates to African Americans in America in 2021? What is slavery in that connection? It is an absolute imperative that we pass that, and an absolute imperative that we pass a bill where a sizable part of it is written by me, and that is the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. As the chair of the crime subcommittee at this time, we must work. There is no excuse for not passing George Floyd. George Floyd needs to pay pass next week. And I'm hoping that June is the month. By the way, in Tulsa, everyone was speaking reparations and HR 40. The survivors were saying they have never been compensated all that their family lost. They lost their ability to be the kind of person they could. Mother Fletcher said she fled at age 4th grade, and she never finished school after that. That's what this fight is all about.
Well, thank you, Representative Lee, and thank you for joining us. We know you were busy working on the floor, leading that debate on Juneteenth, making it a federal holiday, and we appreciate its passing. Thank you, and I'll pass it to Brittany now for a wrapping up for our close.
Thank you for having me, and please forgive me for my delay. I wanted to be here myself, and they just gavelled it down, so thank you for having me. I hope we'll have an opportunity to be together again, where I'm engaging with all of you on the fine points of what we're doing and how important you are to that success. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
I just want to recognize the Congresswoman as one of the hardest working Congress people in our lifetime. She always shows up. She is everywhere in Texas. She comes to her constituency, and she was just here at several different events. And so we want to thank you for always being present and showing up, Congresswoman, because it demonstrates the need for representatives like you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And a special thank you to our moderators, and Sasha. And we also want to just uplift what Congresswoman Lee has stated. It is our duty to continue to organize around HR 1 and HR 40, right? And we must really work diligently in all of our communities across the country. We definitely want to thank the Congresswoman very much for joining us tonight. Before we leave, here at Community Change, we just want to really stress the importance of staying in access our child care tax credit, earned income tax credit portal by texting 40649 and demand Congress to make the expanded child tax credits permanent. And we also have several Facebook events coming up. On June the 23rd, we have Repeal, Repair, and Reparations at 12 p.m. Eastern, featuring one of our Black Freedom Collective partners, Chelsea Hicks Wise, and she's with Marijuana Justice from Virginia. Also, we have on July the 1st at 7 p.m. Eastern, Reclaiming Our Freedom and Joy. And we will have a slate of Black artists from throughout the country really exhibiting as we prepare the 4th of July. And we just want to really highlight our Black freedom and what that means to us. We thank you all for joining us tonight, and we hope that you will continue to follow the Black Freedom Collective and all of the great work that we are doing here at Community Change Action. Thank you and have a great night.